Israel launched new offensives in Rafah. These actions follow a recent escalation in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The situation is critical. The U.S. maintains its support for Israel, defending its right to defend itself. However, this stance has drawn criticism. Many see it as tacit approval of disproportionate force. The conflict has reignited global concerns. It underscores the urgent need for a peaceful resolution. The recent escalation stems from complex historical and political issues, including the ongoing occupation of Palestinian territories. Settlements also remain a significant point of contention. The latest violence only deepens existing divisions, making finding a path to peace even more challenging. The international community is grappling with how to respond to the crisis. Some nations call for an immediate ceasefire, urging both sides to engage in dialogue. Others hesitate to condemn Israel directly due to various geopolitical considerations. The situation highlights the deep divisions within the international community. The U.S., a key player in the conflict, faces mounting pressure to act. Its long-standing alliance with Israel complicates its position. The Biden administration walks a tightrope, seeking to balance its support for Israel with international pressure. However, many criticize its current approach as insufficient, arguing that it does little to de-escalate the situation. Social media has become a crucial battleground in the conflict. It has rapidly disseminated information about the situation in Rafah. Graphic images and first-hand accounts have emerged from the besieged city. These posts quickly go viral, showing the devastating impact of the conflict on civilians. This unfiltered view of the conflict has galvanized public opinion worldwide. Millions are using their platforms to voice support for the Palestinian people. They condemn the violence they see. This digital activism has exerted pressure on governments and international organizations, forcing them to address the situation more forcefully. However, the use of social media is not without its drawbacks. The spread of misinformation is a growing concern. Unverified information can quickly circulate online, exacerbating tensions and complicating efforts for peace. It is essential to approach online content with a critical eye and verify information through reliable sources. Despite these challenges, social media plays a vital role in raising awareness, giving a voice to those directly affected by the conflict. The global community is now more informed than ever before, and the hope is that this awareness will translate into meaningful action. The goal is to achieve a just and lasting peace. The conflict in Rafah has shone a spotlight on the use of U.S. weaponry. Israel, a major recipient of U.S. military aid, which includes advanced weapons systems, is using some of these weapons in the current offensive. This has sparked international controversy. Critics argue that the U.S. is complicit in the violence, pointing to the devastating impact of these weapons on civilians. They call for the suspension of military aid to Israel, believing this would pressure Israel to end the offensive. This issue has sparked debates about arms sales and their ethical implications. The U.S. maintains that its military aid to Israel is intended for defensive purposes, arguing that Israel has a right to defend itself against attacks. However, many question whether the weapons used are proportionate to the threat. The use of U.S. weaponry in the conflict is a complex issue, raising concerns about accountability and responsibility. This debate highlights the responsibility of arms-exporting nations. They must consider the potential consequences of their actions. The use of their weapons in conflicts like Rafah raises serious ethical questions, underscoring the need for greater scrutiny of arms sales. The focus should shift towards promoting diplomacy and peaceful conflict resolution. The ongoing conflict has created a dire humanitarian crisis in Rafah. The city's infrastructure is crumbling, hospitals are overwhelmed with casualties, and the continuous bombardment has left many without access to basic necessities. Food, water, and medical supplies are running dangerously low. The healthcare system, already strained before the escalation, is on the verge of collapse. Hospitals face shortages of essential medicines and equipment. Medical personnel are working tirelessly under extremely challenging conditions. They risk their lives to provide care to the wounded. The international community is struggling to deliver aid to those in need. The siege of Rafah has severely restricted the movement of people and goods. This makes it incredibly difficult to deliver humanitarian aid. The situation is particularly dire for vulnerable populations, including children, the elderly, and those with pre-existing medical conditions. They face heightened risks due to the lack of access to essential services. The humanitarian crisis in Rafah demands immediate international attention. Urgent action is needed to provide aid and protect civilians. Failure to act will have catastrophic consequences. The world must prioritize the well-being of civilians caught in the crossfire. They deserve safety, security, and access to essential needs. The international community has responded to the crisis in Rafah with a mixture of condemnation and calls for restraint. The United Nations has expressed deep concern over the escalating violence. It urges both sides to exercise restraint and protect civilians. However, the UN Security Council remains divided on how to address the situation. Many countries have condemned the violence. They are urging an immediate ceasefire. They argue that a return to negotiations is the only path to a lasting peace. However, concrete actions to enforce a ceasefire have been limited. The international community's response has been criticized as slow and inadequate. Human rights organizations have documented numerous violations. They accuse both sides of committing war crimes. They are calling for independent investigations into these allegations. The indiscriminate targeting of civilians and civilian infrastructure is unacceptable. Those responsible for such acts must be held accountable. The conflict in Rafah has once again exposed the limitations of the international community. Despite widespread condemnation, the violence continues. This raises serious questions about the effectiveness of international law and institutions. The international community must find ways to translate words into action. It needs to protect civilians and achieve a just and lasting peace. The situation in Rafah has further deteriorated with the launch of a ground invasion. Israeli forces are now operating within the city. This significantly increases the risk to civilians. The ground offensive has resulted in heavy fighting in densely populated areas. Civilians are trapped in their homes. They face the constant threat of violence. The ground invasion has led to a surge in civilian casualties. Hospitals are struggling to cope with the influx of wounded. The death toll is mounting. The destruction of infrastructure is widespread. Homes, schools, and hospitals have been damaged or destroyed. This leaves lasting scars on the city and its people. The international community has condemned the ground invasion. It argues that it will only exacerbate the humanitarian crisis. Calls for a ceasefire have intensified. However, Israel remains determined to pursue its military objectives. The situation in Rafah is a stark reminder of the human cost of conflict. The people of Rafah are facing unimaginable hardship. They are caught in a cycle of violence and despair. The international community must act urgently to end the bloodshed. It needs to provide humanitarian assistance to those in need. A just and lasting peace is the only way to prevent further suffering. The world must not turn a blind eye to the unfolding tragedy in Rafah.